impartational word. Listen to one of the ministers of the gospel share with you a word for this day.
Welcome to Compassion's Morning Motivation. I am Pastor Jones, an associate pastor here at the Church of Christian Compassion. In my scriptural reference this morning, I would like to draw your attention to is in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 19. The book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 19. And it reads as follows. Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead. And I want you to two key words I want to focus on this morning is Abraham reasoned and God is able. Abraham reasoned and God is able. And if I had to put a title on it this morning, the title would be If Faith Had a Face. If Faith Had a Face. Don't let your faith waver in the face of adversity. Don't let your faith waver in the face of adversity. This morning, I want to talk a little about the face of faith, what faith should look like to the believer. We see here in the 11th chapter of Hebrews that this writer is committed to illustrating what the face of faith looks like by presenting this New Testament audience with what is considered by most theologians and biblical scholars as the heroes of faith. And the author continues to drive home the reality of what it looks like to be a faith-filled believer and live a life filled by faith by reminding or submitting to the audience in this 11th chapter about the great testimonials of these awesome men and women of God, these patriarchs and matriarchs of old. The writer here in this chapter vehemently wants to address the importance of faith to any and every believer that would hear it. He does this by demonstrating the direct correlation of what it means to be the believer, what it means to the believer to live a life of faith. The text suggests in verse 6 that without it, it's impossible for the believer to even please God. The second chapter of James, verse 17, suggests that it's not only necessary for the believer to possess faith, but our lives must also line up, and signify to it. James goes on to pose the rhetorical question that Abraham, who's not only on the wall of faith in the 11th chapter of Hebrews, but is also known as the father of faith that was justified by his show of faith when he willingly agreed to offer Isaac, his only son, up as a sacrifice in obedience to the instruction of God. You see, when you give God your yes, beloved, he'll do the rest. Somebody just typed that on the screen. When you give God your yes, he'll do the rest. When you get a chance, read for yourself the 10 chapters of the call and climax of Abraham's faith, beginning from chapter 12 to chapter 22 of Genesis. Here you will see that God had given Abraham a word. He had given Abraham a promise. And we know that God does not go back on his word. And once he puts his word out, it will not come back to him void. Therefore, when we believe by faith that the same God who did it before is able to do it again, we witness the manifestation of what we are believing by God by faith for. We witness miracles, signs, and wonders. We witness in the earthly realm what God has already done in the spiritual realm. We become witnesses that we serve a God who can do all things but fail. We witness the hand of God moving mightily and meeting us at every need. Now here it is in the early chapters of Genesis, in the early stages of the Abrahamic journey from Genesis 12 through 22, before Abraham's legacy was cemented as the father of faith. Just like we do early on in our walk with God, Abraham had went through some tough times. He went through some teaching moments. He went through some mountaintop and valley seasons where his faith would waver like a roller coaster ride. Sometimes up, sometimes down. Like all of us, we go through a process where we trust God in one area of our lives, but we won't trust him in another area. We trust him in one season, but we won't trust him in the next. We trust him to fix some circumstances, then we wrestle with some on our own. We're trying to work it out when God has already figured it out. But child of God, let's be reminded to mentally journal and jot down the testimonies of our successes and our failures as we go through this journey, as Abraham did, so that we can recognize and identify how it felt when we tried to carry it on our own versus when we, by faith, turned it all over to God and he turned it around for your good. Beloved, God is just preparing and equipping us with the answers to an open book test that lies ahead. That God, like a proud parent or teacher, God desires us to pass these tests with flying colors, that he might take us higher while our faith in him grows stronger. Keep in mind that we don't know when this test may take place, but it's our job to have gathered enough divine spiritual wisdom from God to be able to successfully navigate through the valley and desert seasons that lie ahead. The Bible tells us that as believers to always be ready. In chapter 12 of Genesis, God called Abraham and gave instruction to Abraham to leave his father's house, take his family, and go to a place that he would show him. And now that takes faith, because Abraham received a call and set out to this place that he had no idea where he was going, but he trusted God that God will get him to his destination. He believed by faith what God had told him. And as I stand here this morning, child of God, I encourage you, as we follow his instructions, keep the faith, walk by faith, and believe by faith, resembling the face of faith in the face of adversity. Trust God to do exactly what he said. Trust God to deliver the promise. I challenge you to believe by faith. I encourage you to hear the voice of God. Stay in tune with his voice. And when he gives the instruction, follow them like Abraham did, obediently. Following God's instructions will always, here it is, produce a reward of favor over your life. Now that his word will not, it will not come back void. Know that his word will not come back void. Believe by faith that the Father's word will definitely accomplish what he set it out to do, to the glory of his kingdom. You see, you got to understand, some tests will seem to put you in a sticky situation, just like here in the text. But I just want to encourage someone this morning that in a sticky situations, don't come unglued. Don't get shook up. Don't shrink back. Don't break down. Don't come apart at the seams, but rather stick to the script. Men and women of God, when it gets sticky, trust what you've studied. When it gets sticky, trust what you've studied. Take his word, stick to it like glue. Let it hold your mind together when you're going through. Let it be a light to your feet and a lamp to your pathway. Let it strengthen you in your time of weakness. In sticky situations, trust what you have studied. Hold on to your faith. Hold on to God's word and his promise. My brother, I encourage you. My sister, I encourage you to trust God in this season. Somebody declared this morning that I'm going to follow instructions. I'm going to trust God and believe by faith and not by what I see and not by sight. Because we know that the just will believe by faith and not what it looks like, not what it feels like, but we're going to trust God through it all. It was by faith that Abraham believed God and received Isaac back from the dead. Because if truth be told, in Abraham's mind, according to how Abraham's faith was set up, according to how his relationship with God was set up in obedience, once he got the instructions, Isaac was just as good as dead. And we have to be the same way when God gives us instructions to cut some stuff off, to cut some people off. We must be obedient that there is a bigger picture down the road. Trust and believe it at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, that it's for our good and it's for God's glory. Abraham reasoned that if he followed the instructions and did what God said to do and carry out the ministry of Simon, that God would take care of the rest, that God would make a way out of no way, that God would perform a miracle. Guess what? He did it before. The same God did it before, and he's the same God that'll do it again. He's the same God who Abraham prayed, and he heard the cry on his journey when he cried out for Sodom and Gomorrah. It's the same God that kept his wife Sarah pure when he wavered in the face of adversity. It's the same God who kept his promise to give him a son even when he messed up and tried to do it on his own. It's the same God who has been faithful despite all my foolishness and unfaithfulness. Beloved, you got to believe and have a made up mind that the same God who gave you the job, the same God who gave you the marriage, the same God who gave you the children, the business, and the vision is the same God who will see you through till the end. Once again, that is our ministry moment this morning. Thank you for tuning in to Compassion's Morning Meditation. We are here every day, 7 a.m. Be blessed.